So the purpose of this video is to show you how to modify the values available in a drop-down list. So for example, suppose I want to change the available attributes of primary goal alignment, or the available choices here in this drop-down. The existing choices are determined by a lookup. The lookup is associated with the attribute on the object. So in order to change the available options, I have to know the name of the lookup associated with this attribute. If I don't know that, which I usually don't, what you need to do is go to the Objects section of the Administration module, which I'll open in a new tab. And on the appropriate object, which in this case is the project object, we drill into that and look at attributes. If I look here for the primary goal alignment attribute over here, I won't find it because the attribute name is simply a label. What you're seeing on the screen here is the label associated with this attribute. So if I look under the Attributes tab of the project object and I scroll down to primary goal alignment, I won't see it there because it's not the name of the attribute. It's just the screen label for it. So all the way down here under PR, prevent, priority, probability, there's no primary goal alignment. So in that case, what I need to do is look at the Views tab on the project object. And under the Views tab, I need to change the partition to AstraZeneca because that's the partition that this project resides in. And once it is finished refreshing, I then go to the Fields link on the Project Properties section. And here I look for the label of primary goal alignment. Now the difficulty here, and this is still redrawing, this screen takes quite a while to pull up. Certain things in the admin module take much longer because the thinking at CA was only the admins ever use this, so they can just wait. The difficulty on this page is that this page is sorted by the attribute name, not by the label, so I can't scroll alphabetically. What I need to do is carefully watch the property label column as I scroll down the screen. Now in this case, I happen to know this one. We relabeled the attribute called goal and gave it a name or label of primary goal alignment. So now that I know which attribute I need, the goal attribute, I can now go back to the Attributes tab. I can hit Return down here. And if I go back to Attributes, and I now scroll down and find goal, I can drill into it, and on the properties of the attribute, I can see that it's associated with the investment goal lookup. So now I know the name of the lookup that I need to modify. It's important to recognize that this is not changeable. So once you have defined an attribute, if you're doing a custom attribute, you can't after the fact go in and change the lookup that it's associated with. You can change the values available in that lookup, but you cannot change that linking. So what you'd have to do then is create a whole new attribute and then migrate the data from the existing one into the new one, which is in another video entirely. So for now, what I want to do is go to the lookup section of the administration module, which is under data administration. And again, I'll open that in another new tab. And there, what I'm going to do is find my investment goal lookup. There it is. And then I'm going to go from there into the Values tab. Now I can see all of the existing values, some of which are active, noted by the little yellow check mark in the active column, and others are not. So if I don't need one anymore, I can select it and say deactivate, and then it would no longer show up on the drop down on the object. But in this case, if I want to add a new one, I click the New button. Now, it's important to recognize that the partition comes into play here. We'll have another video and knowledge transfer on partitions, so I don't want to go into it in too much depth, but suffice to say that if you put something in the system partition, put a value of a lookup in the system partition, then that value will be available to all Clarity users. At some point in time, we expect to start using partitions to enable different views of Clarity for different parts of the AstraZeneca organization. So IT might be one partition, global engineering could conceivably be another partition. In that case, both IT and global engineering would be able to see all of these values, whichever ones are active, because all of them are in the system partition. But if we create a new attribute and we put it only in the global engineering partition, then people in IT would not see that choice in their drop-down on their project. So do pay attention to the partition. The practice that I've been following to date is to put all values in the system partition to always make sure that they're available for everyone. But that could change in the future. So for now, if I want to add a new value for goal, I can click the new button. I can call it whatever I want, and I give it an ID, and I check the partition and set that to system, and then I click save and return. Now I've already set up a test value, so I'm not just going to keep populating more. I've got one here called test value that's currently inactive. So I can check that one and make it active. And now if I go back to my project and refresh the screen and look under primary goal alignment, I now have test value available to me. The other thing that I want to point out here is the ID. This is a string field in this case, and you do have that choice when you're setting up a new lookup, which is a different video again. But for now, when we're creating new values, the standard that I've adopted is to always use a number. If you use a string here, if I called test value, if I gave it an ID of test underscore value, that's okay. But what I found is quite often we go back and we change the label. So we might set up something like return to growth and then later say, oh, we really didn't want to call it return to growth. We really wanted to call it, strategic initiative number 1 or something. So if you have to change that label, there's no way to change the ID. The ID is create it once, it never changes. So in the interest of making that simplified, I've always put in numbers here. And you can see I didn't always do it, but I adopted that standard, and that's how I've been doing it. Seems to work quite well. The other place this comes into play is if you're developing a query for a custom lookup or a custom portlet, the query uses the ID. And it's easier to use a number in a query than it is to use these string values. Even though it's not quite as meaningful, it makes things much simpler. So for that reason as well, I've adopted the standard of always just using numbers. So that's how you add a new value, and that's how you can activate and deactivate existing values. The other thing that comes into play here is if you have an attribute that looks fairly simple and you want to add another value to it, like architectural fit up here. This has low, medium, high, and very high. If we decided that we also wanted to have very low available for architectural fit, you would go through the same process of locating the attribute, see which lookup it's associated with, go to that lookup, and change the value. But you have to be careful because there are some instances in which the same lookup is used for multiple attributes, potentially across multiple objects. So if I change the lookup values available for architectural fit, you can see that it's also going to change the values for commercial value. This is a problem, so you need to be very careful. You can't just change that lookup. If you're going to change the available values for one attribute that uses a common lookup, what you generally end up having to do is create a whole new attribute. when you create the new attribute, you associate it with a new lookup that has the values that you want. Then you're faced with the problem of an existing attribute that has data in it on potentially hundreds or thousands of projects, which now needs to be migrated to the new attribute. And then you need to add the new attribute to the screen and remove the old one. So I'm not going to cover the process of how you go about migrating that data in this video, but do be aware that if you're going to change the values in a lookup, make very sure that that lookup is not used for other attributes. And unfortunately, there's nothing on the lookup screen that says, here are all the attributes that use this lookup. You really have to either know the attributes from lots of use, or you have to go digging and start looking. Many of the standard lookups like yes, no, unknown, and that sort of thing, high, medium, low, those you can pretty much depend on being used for lots of different attributes. So where you have a clear alignment of attribute name and lookup name, then you're fairly safe. But as in this example, I have goal and I have investment goal. And the fact that it says investment goal implies that this is used on other investment objects besides just a project. So again, you have to be very cautious. If you add a new value, it might show up in places you don't want it to show up, and then you've got an issue. So that's that. See you in the next video.